The morning drizzle of Manchester cast a grey shadow over the small cafe on Deansgate as 17-year-old Caspian pushed through the glass door, his clothes damp and wrinkled from another sleepless night. The familiar scent of fresh coffee and warm pastries hit him like a cruel reminder of everything he could not afford. His stomach had been empty for 2 days now, a hollow ache that had become his constant companion. Millicent looked up from behind the counter, her weathered hands pausing mid-wipe on a ceramic mug. She recognized the boy who had been lingering outside her cafe for the past week, always watching, never entering. Today, something was different. His usual hesitation was replaced by desperate determination. "Excuse me, madam," Caspian's voice cracked as he approached the counter, his hands trembling slightly. "Do you have any food that you are going to throw away?" The question hung in the air like a confession. Millicent's eyes widened, taking in the boy's hollow cheeks and the way his school uniform hung loose on his diminishing frame. Around the cafe, conversations quieted as patrons turned to witness this moment of raw vulnerability. Fenwick, a regular customer nursing his third cup of tea, shook his head in disgust. "Bloody hell, what is wrong with these lazy young people today? Get a proper job instead of begging, you wastrel." Caspian's face flushed crimson, his fists clenched at his sides as shame washed over him like a tide. For a moment, he stood frozen, the weight of judgment crushing down on his shoulders. Then something inside him snapped. "I am not lazy." The words exploded from his chest with such force that the entire cafe fell silent. Tears streamed down his face as months of suppressed anguish poured out. "I work 16 hours a day, I sleep 3 hours a night. I have not eaten for 2 days because—" His voice shattered completely. In the corner booth, a large figure slowly stood up. Tyson Fury had been sitting quietly, hoping for a peaceful breakfast away from the chaos of his training camp. But something about this boy's raw pain struck him to his core. Caspian's sobs filled the silence as he whispered, "Because my mother cannot know that I am failing." But what could a teenager who worked 16 hours a day possibly be hiding from his own mother? 3 months earlier, when Caspian's father walked out on their family without warning, Araminta's world collapsed entirely. The woman who had once filled their small flat with laughter and warmth became a shadow of herself. She would spend entire days in bed, staring at the ceiling, tears streaming silently down her cheeks. The bills piled up unopened on the kitchen table while she struggled to find the strength to even brush her hair. Caspian watched his mother waste away, powerless to stop her spiral into darkness. Lysander, his 12-year-old brother, would ask why Mum would not come to watch his football matches anymore, why she would not help with his homework, why she barely spoke at dinner. The questions broke Caspian's heart because he had no answers. One particularly dark evening, as Araminta sat motionless on the sofa, Caspian knelt beside her and took her hands in his. "Mum, listen to me," he said, with the determination of someone far older than his 17 years. "I'm going to take care of everything. You do not need to worry about anything anymore. I promise you, everything will be all right." It was a promise that would change the trajectory of his entire life. From that moment, Caspian transformed himself into the man of the house. He found work at a local delivery service, cycling through Manchester's streets from 6 in the morning until noon. After a quick change of clothes, he would rush to his afternoon job at a warehouse, lifting boxes and managing inventory until 6 in the evening. Then, with barely time for a sandwich, he would head to his night shift cleaning offices until 2 in the morning. 3 jobs, 16 hours a day, 7 days a week. The transformation in Araminta was gradual but miraculous. Seeing her eldest son shoulder such responsibility ignited something within her. She began to leave her room more often, started cooking simple meals, and eventually found the courage to apply for a part-time position at a local library. The smile slowly returned to her face, and for the first time in months, their flat felt like a home again. Lysander's grades improved as his mother helped with homework once more. The family began eating dinner together, sharing stories and laughter that had been absent for so long. To the outside world, they appeared to be a family that had overcome tragedy through love and determination. But beneath this facade of recovery, Caspian was slowly drowning. Back in the cafe, Millicent's heart broke as she listened to the boy's story. Without saying a word, she moved to the display case and began carefully wrapping several sandwiches and pastries in brown paper. She added a thermos of hot soup and a bottle of water, creating a small feast that would sustain him for days. "Here, love," she said quietly, pressing the package into his hands. "And do not you dare try to pay me." Caspian's eyes filled with tears of gratitude. "Thank you," he whispered, clutching the food like a lifeline. I do not know what to say." "You do not need to say anything," Millicent replied, her voice thick with emotion. Just take care of yourself. For the first time in weeks, Caspian felt a glimmer of hope. Perhaps things were finally looking up. Perhaps his sacrifices were paying off. Perhaps the worst was behind them. He walked home with a lighter step, the warm food in his hands, a symbol of human kindness in a world that had felt increasingly cold. As he climbed the stairs to their flat, he could hear Lysander's laughter echoing through the walls, a sound that made every hour of exhaustion worthwhile. But as he reached their door, Caspian noticed an official-looking envelope that had been slipped underneath. His hands trembled as he opened it, and his heart stopped as he read the contents. Lysander had been accepted to Whitmore Academy, one of Manchester's most prestigious private schools, on a full academic scholarship. It was the opportunity of a lifetime, a chance for his brilliant little brother to access the kind of education that could change his entire future. There was just one problem. The school required £2,000 up front for uniforms, books and equipment. The deadline was in 2 weeks, and without this payment, Lysander would lose his place. Caspian sank to his knees in the hallway, the letter shaking in his hands. After working himself to the bone for months, after sacrificing his health, his education, his entire adolescence, he had managed to save exactly £47. The hope that had blossomed in his chest just moments before withered and died. How could he possibly find £2,000 in 2 weeks? How could he explain to Lysander that his dreams were impossible? How could he face his mother's disappointment when she learned the truth about their financial situation? As he sat in that dim hallway, surrounded by the sounds of his family's happiness, Caspian realized that his greatest challenge was yet to come. The weight of his promise to his mother pressed down on him like a physical force, and for the first time since his father left, he wondered if some promises were simply too heavy for one person to carry. Desperation drove Caspian to places he never thought he would go. He approached his delivery supervisor, begging for extra shifts, even offering to work for reduced pay. He scoured Manchester for additional part-time work, applying to every shop, restaurant and service centre that would consider a teenager. He sold his bicycle, his football boots, his guitar, everything he owned that held any value. The mathematics were cruel and unforgiving. Even if he worked 20 hours a day, 7 days a week, the numbers simply would not add up. But Caspian was beyond rational thought now. He was a young man possessed, driven by a promise that had become his entire identity. In his desperation, Caspian began exploring increasingly dangerous options. He found himself standing outside a pawn shop in Moss Side, clutching his father's old watch, the only thing of value his father had left behind. The irony was not lost on him. He was selling pieces of the man who had abandoned them to save the family that man had destroyed. The elderly shopkeeper examined the timepiece with practiced indifference, turning it over in his weathered hands. "Swiss movement, decent condition," the man muttered, his thick glasses sliding down his nose. £30, take it or leave it. Caspian's heart sank. The watch had been his grandfather's before his father's, a family heirloom that represented generations of his lineage. For £30, barely enough to buy textbooks, let alone uniforms, but he had no choice. Every penny counted now. Walking away from the pawn shop, Caspian felt as though he had sold a piece of his soul along with the watch. The weight of the crumpled notes in his pocket felt insignificant compared to the emptiness in his chest. He spent hours on his phone, calling distant relatives he barely knew, swallowing his pride to ask for loans. The conversations followed a predictable pattern. Initial surprise at hearing from him, polite inquiries about his mother and brother, then awkward silence when he explained his situation. His cousin Marcus in Birmingham was sympathetic, but blunt. "Mate, I have got my own kids to think about. University fees are mental these days." His uncle David in Scotland was more diplomatic. "If I could help, you know I would, son, but the garage is barely breaking even." Most calls went unanswered entirely. Those who did pick up offered sympathetic words but little else. "Times are hard for everyone, love," his great-aunt in Liverpool explained apologetically. "If I had it, you know I would help. Have you tried the council? They sometimes have emergency funds for education." Caspian had tried the council. He had tried every charity, every foundation, every organization that claimed to help young people in crisis. The bureaucracy was a maze of forms, waiting lists and eligibility criteria that seemed designed to exclude rather than include. Even if help was available, the timescales were measured in months, not days. The rejection from the hardship fund was particularly crushing. "While we sympathize with your circumstances," the letter read, "funding is prioritized for families with multiple children under 16. We encourage you to reapply next quarter. Next quarter would be far too late. As the days passed, Caspian's desperation drove him to consider increasingly drastic measures. He researched payday loans, despite knowing the astronomical interest rates would trap his family in debt for years. He looked into medical trials that paid participants, though most required participants to be 18. He even considered donating blood plasma, only to discover that the payment barely covered his bus fare to the clinic. One particularly dark evening, he found himself walking through the rougher parts of Manchester, areas his mother had always warned him to avoid. He had heard whispers at school about quick money, drug runs for teenagers who were desperate enough and naive enough to think they would not get caught. The very thought made him sick, but the arithmetic was seductive. One weekend's work could solve all his problems. He stood outside a known dealer's house for nearly an hour, watching the steady stream of customers, calculating the money that must be changing hands. A group of boys his own age lounged on the steps, their designer trainers and gold chains telling their own story. One of them noticed his hesitation and approached. "You looking for work, bruv?" the boy asked, his eyes scanning Caspian's worn clothing and desperate expression. "My boss is always looking for smart lads. Clean records, no police attention, easy money." For a terrifying moment, Caspian almost said yes. The word was forming on his lips when he thought about Lysander, about his mother's faith in him, about the kind of man his father had been, and the kind of man he had sworn never to become. Without a word, he turned and walked away, the boys' mocking laughter following him down the street. That night, he sat in his room staring at his school books, untouched for weeks now. His teachers had stopped calling about his absences, assuming he had simply dropped out like so many others. His A-level exams were approaching, but what was the point? He had already sacrificed his education for his family's survival. University seemed like a luxury from another lifetime. The physical toll was becoming impossible to hide. His uniform hung loose on his shrinking frame, and dark circles shadowed his eyes like bruises. His hands had developed a persistent tremor that made simple tasks challenging. Araminta noticed his weight loss, but attributed it to the stress of growing up, the natural transition from boy to man. "You are becoming so responsible," she told him one morning, running her fingers through his hair. "Sometimes I look at you and see a stranger. My little boy has become such a strong young man." If only she knew how weak he felt, how close he was to complete collapse. The breaking point came during a particularly brutal shift at the warehouse. Caspian was lifting boxes that seemed to grow heavier with each hour, his vision blurring from exhaustion and hunger. He had eaten nothing but a packet of crisps in the past 18 hours, spending his meal money on bus fares instead. As he hefted a particularly heavy box, his legs simply gave out. The cardboard container crashed to the floor, its contents scattering across the warehouse concrete. His supervisor, a man with no patience for weakness, appeared within seconds. "That is coming out of your wages, son," he said coldly. "Damaged goods are not tolerated here." The £15 docked from his pay might as well have been 1,500. Every penny mattered now, and this careless mistake had set him back even further. As Caspian knelt on the cold floor, gathering scattered items with trembling hands, he felt something fundamental break inside him. He was failing at everything, as a student, as a worker, as a son, as a brother. The promise he had made to his mother was destroying him piece by piece, and he was no closer to keeping it than when he had started. Sleep became a luxury he could not afford. He would doze fitfully on buses between jobs, his head resting against cold windows as Manchester's streets blurred past. His meals consisted of whatever free samples he could find, or the occasional discarded sandwich from office bins during his cleaning shifts. His school attendance became sporadic, then non-existent. At home, the pressure of maintaining his facade became almost unbearable. Araminta would hum while cooking dinner, her spirits lifted by Lysander's achievement and her renewed sense of purpose. She had even started talking about returning to university herself, inspired by her son's academic success. "I am so proud of you, Caspian," she said one evening as they washed dishes together. "Look how you have turned our lives around. Your father always said you would amount to nothing, but look at you now, working, supporting us, making sure Lysander gets his chance." Each word of praise felt like a dagger in Caspian's chest. He forced a smile and nodded, but inside he was screaming. How could he tell her that her faith in him was misplaced? How could he admit that despite working himself to death, he was failing in the most spectacular way possible? Lysander, blissfully unaware of the financial crisis, had already started telling his friends about Whitmore Academy. He would come home each day with stories about the school's laboratories, their football pitches, the university preparation programs. His excitement was infectious, and neighbors began stopping Araminta in the street to congratulate her on her son's achievement. "That Lysander of yours is going places," Mrs. Patterson from downstairs would say. "You must be so relieved that Caspian can handle the finances. What a responsible young man you have raised." The irony was suffocating. Everyone saw Caspian as the responsible one, the one who had everything under control. If only they knew that he was drowning, that each day brought him closer to a failure that would destroy not just his own future, but his family's dreams as well. During his cleaning shifts, Caspian began to notice things he had never paid attention to before. Office workers would leave money on their desks, sometimes substantial amounts. Computer equipment sat unguarded in empty buildings. His mind began to venture into dark territories, considering actions that went against everything he had been taught about right and wrong. One night, while cleaning a law firm in the city center, he found himself standing in front of an open safe. Inside, he could see bundles of cash, easily enough to cover Lysander's school expenses. His hand hovered near the money for what felt like an eternity. All he had to do was reach out and take it. Who would know? Who would suspect the quiet cleaning boy? But as he stood there, trembling with exhaustion and desperation, he thought about his mother's face, about the pride in her eyes when she spoke about her sons. He thought about Lysander's innocent excitement, about the trust they had placed in him. With tremendous effort, he stepped away from the safe and continued his work. The near theft left him shaken. He realized how close he had come to crossing a line he could never uncross. The desperation was making him consider things that would destroy not just his family's financial future, but their moral foundation as well. The human body, however, has its limits. The warning signs had been building for days. His hands had developed a persistent tremor, and his vision would occasionally blur without warning. He had started experiencing chest pains that he attributed to stress, and his coordination was deteriorating. Simple tasks became monumental challenges, but he pushed through, convinced that willpower alone could overcome physical limitations. It happened on a Tuesday night during his delivery route. Caspian was cycling through the rain-slicked streets of Salford, his vision blurring from exhaustion, when the world suddenly tilted sideways. The bicycle seemed to take on a life of its own, weaving uncontrollably as his grip weakened on the handlebars. The last thing he remembered was the taste of blood in his mouth and the sound of his bicycle clattering against the pavement. A concerned passerby called an ambulance, and Caspian woke up in Manchester Royal Infirmary, fluorescent lights burning his eyes and the steady beep of monitoring equipment filling his ears. A tired-looking doctor with kind eyes explained that he had collapsed from severe dehydration and exhaustion. His blood sugar levels were dangerously low, and his body had simply shut down, unable to continue the punishing schedule he had imposed upon it. "Young man," the doctor said gravely, "if you continue at this pace, the next collapse could be far more serious. Your body is giving you a warning. You need to listen to it." But Caspian was not listening to medical advice. All he could think about was the time he was losing, the money he was not earning, the deadline that was approaching with relentless certainty. He discharged himself against medical advice, ignoring the doctor's protests and the concerned looks from the nursing staff. The hospital bill was devastating, but not as devastating as the phone call from his delivery supervisor the next day. "We cannot have employees who are unreliable," the voice on the other end explained with cold professionalism. "We are sorry, but we have to let you go." Just like that, his primary source of income vanished. The £47 he had saved went to cover the hospital expenses, leaving him with nothing but an empty wallet and a week to find £2,000. Caspian returned home to find Araminta and Lysander excitedly discussing uniform fittings and book lists. His mother had already called her sister to share the good news, and several neighbors had stopped by to congratulate the family. The pride in Araminta's eyes was radiant, the first genuine happiness Caspian had seen from her since his father left. He could not bring himself to shatter that joy. "How are we going to pay for everything?" Lysander asked innocently over dinner, his voice filled with excitement rather than concern. "Do not worry about that," Caspian replied, forcing a smile that felt like it might crack his face. "I have got it all sorted." But he did not have it sorted. He had nothing sorted. He was a 17-year-old boy who had pushed himself beyond human limits and still come up short. The weight of his promise to his mother felt like a boulder on his chest, making it difficult to breathe. That night, he lay awake, staring at the ceiling, his mind racing through increasingly desperate scenarios. He considered approaching loan sharks, despite knowing the dangers. He thought about stealing, though the idea made him physically ill. He even contemplated running away, leaving his family to deal with the consequences of his failure. But in the end, he always returned to the same conclusion. He would rather die than disappoint his mother again. The next morning, Caspian found himself back at Millicent's cafe, but this time he could not even bring himself to ask for food. He simply sat in the corner booth, staring at his hands, feeling the weight of his failure pressing down on him like a physical force. He had fought so hard, sacrificed so much, and pushed himself beyond every reasonable limit, yet here he was, defeated by simple arithmetic and the cruel reality of a world that demanded more than any teenager should be expected to give. Across the cafe, Tyson Fury sat in his usual spot, watching the young man who had captured his attention days earlier. The boy who had exploded with such raw emotion was now sitting in complete silence, and somehow that silence was even more heartbreaking than his tears had been. Tyson had seen many fighters in his career, men who had been broken by the sport, by life, by circumstances beyond their control. But he had never seen someone so young carry such a heavy burden with such quiet dignity. This was not the silence of giving up. This was the silence of someone who had fought until there was nothing left to fight with. As Caspian sat in that corner booth, his shoulders slumped in defeat, Tyson made a decision that would change both their lives forever. Sometimes the greatest victories happen not in the ring, but in the quiet moments when one human being chooses to reach out to another. The approach was so quiet that Caspian almost missed it. One moment he was alone with his thoughts. The next, Tyson Fury was standing beside his table, not with the swagger of a champion, but with the gentle presence of someone who understood suffering. "Mind if I sit down, lad?" Tyson asked, his voice carrying none of the bravado that television audiences knew. Caspian looked up, surprise flickering across his exhausted features. He had recognized the boxer immediately, of course. Everyone in Manchester knew Tyson Fury. But there was something different about him here, away from the cameras and crowds. He seemed smaller somehow, more human. Yes, of course," Caspian stammered, straightening up in his seat. Tyson settled into the opposite chair, his large frame somehow managing to appear non-threatening. He did not mention boxing or fame or any of the obvious conversation starters. Instead, he noticed the cuts on Caspian's knuckles, the way his school uniform hung loose on his diminishing frame, the dark circles under his eyes that spoke of sleepless nights and endless worry. "I have been watching you for a few days now," Tyson said quietly. "I have fought against opponents I could not beat, son, but I have never seen anyone fighting 3 fights at the same time like you are." Caspian's defenses immediately went up. "I do not need pity," he said, his voice sharp with pride. "Good," Tyson replied, "because I am not offering any. What I am offering is recognition. You see, I know what it looks like when someone is carrying a weight that is too heavy for one person." There was something in Tyson's tone that made Caspian pause. This was not the voice of a celebrity offering charity. This was the voice of someone who had been in dark places himself. "You do not understand," Caspian said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I made a promise to my mother. I told her I would take care of everything. She has been through so much, and if I fail now, what happens if you kill yourself trying to keep that promise?" Tyson asked gently. "What happens to your mother then? What happens to your brother?" The question hit Caspian like a physical blow. He had been so focused on not failing that he had never considered the consequences of his own destruction. Over the following days, Tyson became a regular presence at the cafe. He would arrive each morning, order his coffee, and sit with Caspian for an hour before heading to his training. They talked about family, about the weight of responsibility, about the difference between strength and stubbornness. "My father was not around much when I was growing up," Tyson shared one grey morning. "I thought that meant I had to be perfect for my mother, that I could not show weakness or ask for help. Nearly destroyed me, that thinking did." Caspian found himself opening up in ways he never had before. He told Tyson about his father's abandonment, about watching his mother slip into depression, about the promise that had become his prison. He spoke about Lysander's acceptance to Whitmore Academy, about the impossible £2,000, about lying awake at night, wondering if he was strong enough to carry his family's hopes. "Strength is not about carrying everything alone," Tyson said during one of their conversations. "Strength is about knowing when to accept help so you can keep protecting what matters most." But Tyson did not just offer words. While Caspian was struggling with his impossible deadline, Tyson was making phone calls. He contacted the school directly, speaking with the headmaster about exceptional circumstances. He arranged for local businesses to sponsor students from disadvantaged backgrounds. He worked quietly behind the scenes, using his influence not for publicity, but for genuine help. The breakthrough came on a Thursday afternoon. Caspian was at the cafe, preparing for what he thought would be his final conversation with Tyson before admitting defeat, when Lysander burst through the door. "Caspian!" his brother shouted, his face radiant with excitement. "The school just called. They said everything has been sorted, the uniforms, the books, all of it. They said an anonymous benefactor has covered everything." Caspian's heart stopped. He looked across the cafe at Tyson, who was studiously avoiding eye contact while sipping his coffee. The realization hit him like a wave. "You," Caspian began, but Tyson held up a hand. "It was not just me," Tyson said quietly. "I may have made some calls, but the school has programs for students like your brother. Sometimes you just need someone to point you in the right direction." But that was not the end of Tyson's intervention. Through his connections, he had also arranged for Caspian to interview for a position at a local sports center. Proper work with regular hours and decent pay. The kind of job that would allow him to support his family without destroying himself. "But why?" Caspian asked, tears streaming down his face. "Why would you do this for me?" Tyson was quiet for a long moment. "Because I have been where you are," he said finally. "I have felt that weight, that responsibility. I have fought battles that nearly broke me, but I learned something important. Asking for help does not make you weak. It makes you wise." The following week, Caspian started his new job. The pay was not extraordinary, but it was steady, and it allowed him to contribute to his family's welfare without sacrificing his health or his education. More importantly, it gave him permission to be 17 years old again. As Lysander prepared for his first day at Whitmore Academy, Caspian felt a lightness he had not experienced in months. His mother, sensing the change in her eldest son, began to take on more responsibility herself. The family dynamics shifted from crisis management to genuine healing. On his final morning at the cafe before starting college again, Caspian found a note tucked under his coffee cup. In Tyson's unmistakable handwriting it read, "A hero is not someone who fights alone until they die. A hero is someone who protects their family and still finds a way to save themselves. Keep being a hero, champion." Caspian folded the note carefully and placed it in his wallet. For the first time in months he allowed himself to smile, not the forced smile he had worn to protect his mother, but a genuine expression of hope and gratitude. As he walked home through the Manchester streets, Caspian reflected on the lesson he had learned. True strength was not about carrying impossible burdens alone. It was about having the courage to accept help when it was offered, the wisdom to know when you had reached your limits, and the grace to allow others to lift you up when you could no longer stand. He had kept his promise to his mother, but more importantly, he had learned that some promises are too important to keep alone. In accepting Tyson's help, he had not shown weakness. He had shown the kind of strength that creates ripples of kindness that extend far beyond a single moment of crisis. That evening, as his family gathered around the dinner table, Caspian looked at his mother's smile and his brother's excitement about his new school. He had not just saved their dreams, he had learned to save himself in the process. And in that small flat in Manchester, surrounded by the people he loved most, Caspian finally understood what it meant to be a true hero.